Greetings and welcome back. Needing a villain for your story, an existential dread that creeps into your stories in insidious ways, something that hasn't been done a million times already. I got you, fam. Ready for it? It is the sun. So let's look at what would a Norse dwarf, a Tolkien-esque troll, and gremlin all have in common. Well, it's a deadline. And that deadline is the sun. The fear of sunlight is a powerful and ancient tool in storytelling, and it's an instant ticking clock and a perfect weakness for an all-powerful evil. But what else can we do with it? Well, as I've said before in other videos, the story is all about perspective, all right? So from Superman's perspective, he is this powerful warrior for justice and protecting the innocent and fighting against, great, powerful forces of evil that nobody else can. From your average citizen in Metropolis, he is a walking nightmare. First of all, he's incredibly powerful. Shows like Invincible or The Boys have kind of played into this of like what happens if Superman goes off the rails. But also, like, let's think if Mike Tyson and Floyd Mayweather, every time they had a boxing match that, 3-4 blocks of downtown was just absolutely annihilated. You'd have a tracking app on those guys, and whenever they were coming to town, it's time to go on vacation and maybe list your house for sale. And so that's Superman. This is the sun, giver of life, warmth, heat. It also nourishes our plants, unless you're a vampire. Or if you remember this jerk. I wrote a short story years ago called The First Day. It was unpublished. It might be in an internet archive somewhere. But essentially the idea was the Earth wasn't a living organism and that vampires predated humans. But in this world, the sun had never risen before until this day. And so these vampire people that drink from rivers of blood, that, this symbiotic relationship between them and the planet. And then one day all hell breaks loose. The sun glimmers over the horizon. And at first they're like, what is that? Like the sky is changing color because it's never done that before. Then the sun peeks through and then people just start screaming and bursting into flames. And everybody that doesn't get killed in the initial wave tries to find a place to hide and hunker down, and their society changes forever. Now that's just one example of how you can use this. And there's a number of ways that we'll play around with this and see how this could play out in your own content creation. Now, in the Eddas, there's the story of Thor and Alvis. Alvis tries to steal Thor's daughter, and Thor, for whatever reason, can't just smash him with his hammer. I forget the exact reason. Or it's just one of those things that's not gone into in the story. But he decides to test Alvis's wisdom. So he keeps asking him a series of questions to see if he can answer them. And he keeps Alvis busy for so long that Alvis stays there answering these questions to show off his knowledge and wisdom until the sun comes up and turns him to stone. And if that sounds familiar, you've probably read or seen The Hobbit, in which case Tolkien kind of borrowed this story for his trolls. Then you've got the legend of the vampire. Now, in modern media, vampires, just burst into flames, and it looks very good cinematically. In folklore, it was more about a waning of the supernatural and the waning of the powers of darkness. And so they would be weakened and, have to retreat to their graves to, strike another night. Now, many tales of ghosts and specters and early vampiric figures feature creatures like the Strigoi, which specifically return to their graves at the cock's crow. Now, the rooster's crow is symbolic of the coming of dawn, the, pushing back of the night and the coming of a new day. So the nature of the weakness for these creatures is banishment, a loss of power, a receding. And you see this concept played out in mythology where older powers fade away and the newer powers come into play. You see that over and over again with the gods. This is more of a microcosm, but the Egyptians also played with this idea that Ra, after the sun sets, basically has to fight his way through legions of monsters, in his ship called Millions of Years, just fighting his way through the night to come back up again the next day. Ra's doing a lot to raise the sun every morning. You should show a little gratitude. Now, what if the story is from the point of view of the vampire or the undead? You know, maybe they're caught in a scenario where they're being hunted by humans in the forest and they have to keep finding shelter or dive into a cave and hope that they can get deep enough in or bury themselves deep enough that they aren't found during the day in their weakness. You've also got other creatures in other cinema that have played around with this idea. You have the movie Gremlins, where the gremlins just melt during the day. It's really nasty. You've got Greg Wiseman's Gargoyles, where they turn to stone during the day and then they break back out at night, but they're completely helpless during the day, and that causes some problems throughout the story. I am also picturing this scene where you maybe have a vampire that's trapped in a building, and they don't get out before day breaks, and now they're trying to maneuver through this like busted out warehouse where there's certain windows missing or parts of walls, and they're trying to maneuver through to get to like a subterranean access tunnel at the other end of the building. Meanwhile, there's a bunch of people with crossbows and shotguns, traveling from room to room to try to catch them, and they're knocking out windows and stuff like that to pour more sunlight into the building, and we're following the character that's trying to make it through all that and not die. Now let's go ahead and take a walk through the annals of folklore. One of the first examples would be the kobold. Now the kobold are, mischievous prankster spirits, sometimes nocturnal or subterranean, and while the sun doesn't necessarily burn them to a crisp, direct exposure is said to weaken them, drive them away, or even reveal their true, kind of not human form. Now, the nature of this weakness is them being weakened or revealed. Sunlight is a truth teller, stripping away the glamours and illusions of the night. I might do an entire video down the road on glamour itself. There's a lot of fun topics there, but having something that pierces through illusions, either sunlight or some other source, could be a fun element to play with in your own stories. The Nicor, the magical water horse, similar to the Scottish Kelpie, it appears as a beautiful horse. It will lure people to ride it, and then it will jump into the nearest body of water and drown you. Its weakness is that if you shout its true name, Nicor, it loses all of its power. The second weakness is that the sign of the cross carved on its back will tame it. So if you get stuck, carve the sign of the cross real quick, and you're good to go. But relevant to this topic, some legends say that it cannot bear to hear the name of a church or will flee at the sound, connecting it to the broader theme of holy things repelling dark creatures. And while not direct, as a sunlight weakness, it does fit the light versus dark trope. You have, obviously, vampires. Definitely a big one. Lots of different vampires. I could do an entire series of videos on just vampires alone because there's just so many different types of them. But sunlight, Dracula, it weakens Dracula, takes away some of his powers, but in Bram Stoker's Dracula, it doesn't kill him. In Nosferatu, they wanted kind of a more climactic ending, so that was where he just burns, to a crisp and bursts into flames. You've also got the Slua. Now, the Slua are spirits of restless or unforgiven dead. They're considered so sinful that they've been rejected by both heaven and hell, and the underworld didn't want them either, so now they're stuck to wander Earth. They fly through the night sky, usually in a group, seeking to steal the souls of the dying. As creatures of darkness and misery, the Slua are part of the unseelie court, considered malevolent. Their power is in darkness, and the coming of the dawn is said to repel them and push them away. More specifically, they show aversion to any light, either natural or man-made. So a lit fire or a candle or maybe even a flashlight can help ward them off and prevent them from entering your home. Now, for some of the gamers in the group, if you've ever played Skyrim, you're definitely familiar with this one, the Draugr. The Draugr is it's not quite a zombie because there's a certain amount of sentience to it. It is the reanimated corpse of a Viking warrior. They're considered to be very strong, able to increase their size, and then have some magical abilities depending on the story. They are very difficult to kill and usually guard treasure. Some sort of treasure mound, and lurk in that area. So sorry guys, Skyrim didn't come up with that. That's a Norse myth that they heavily borrowed from, as did Tolkien and a lot of other content creators. So the Draugr's power is linked to its tomb and the darkness of the grave. Now, they are almost exclusively encountered at night and emerging from, they'll emerge from their burrows after sunset to terrorize the living. Now, while the Eddas aren't explicit that sunlight burns them, the consistent narrative is that they do not come out during the day. So the day pushes them back into their burrows, and you're safe again until nightfall. You've also got the Jiangshi. Now they're referred to as the hopping vampire or the hopping zombie, which has made for some pretty comical movies in the past. So the explanation is due to their rigor mortis, their limbs are stiff, and the only way they can't walk like regular people, so they have to hop around with their arms outstretched, and then they will try to absorb your life essence. Now, their powers are connected with the moon, the principles of yin, and sunlight is the associated with yang, so pushes them back, and depending on the story, can burn or destroy them entirely, or you can have a Taoist, Buddhist, Shinto priest use their abilities to repel them and push them back to the night where they belong. The Lamia. The Lamia was originally a beautiful queen of Libya who had an affair with Zeus. Yeah, another one of those. Zeus. Enraged, Hera killed Lamia's children and cursed her never to be able to close her eyes, so she would be forever in torment with the image of her dead children. Man, Hera, that's cold-blooded. Over time, her story evolved, and the term Lamia came to describe a child-eating vampiric demon that preyed on young men and children. As a monstrous figure born from grief and darkness, the Lamia's activities were usually confined to night. She was a night spirit, and like many, evil or malevolent Greek entities, she would operate at night under the cover of darkness. Helios or Apollo would draw their chariot into the sky, and the break of day would banish her and all of, her kindred spirits back to the underworld for another day. Now, there's also some examples in pop culture. You've got the Gremlins movies from the 80s where they would just kind of melt into this nasty pile of goo. I mentioned Greg Weisman's Gargoyles earlier. And then you have the Dark Crystal, the Gelflings. Now, the Gelflings are the heroes of the story, and they're up against the evil Skeksis. Now, there's a prophecy in the story that says that the Skeksis' rule will be ended by Gelfling hand or else by none. The Skeksis are using the great conjunction of the three suns to try to gain eternal life using the Dark Crystal, and the Gelfling want to use the same event to heal the crystal. So you've got two groups of people, both centered on the same event and the same crystal, one using to control and dominate, the other group wanting to heal and restore the world to the people that live there. So that's an interesting way, and I feel like Dark Crystal, I love the Dark Crystal mythos and the stories. Netflix should have brought back for season 2. You'd already built all the puppets and sets. Come on. Anyway, that aside, so you've got two groups of people that need the same event and the same magical object for two completely different purposes. And that's something you can definitely play with in your own content creation, whether that object is a sword or a chalice, but maybe two different groups have two very different uses for it. One benign, one not so much, or maybe both are equally relevant. Maybe each person needs that particular object to save a dying loved one. Who's more important? Who wins in that scenario? Who do you root for? If you're wanting to get more into gray area, that can be another route to go. Now, in this regard, the sun isn't necessarily a weapon, but is an act of divine providence. And when the three suns align, that's when the Dark Crystal is going to do its thing. Avatar plays with the same concept. They've got to do X, Y, and Z before Sozin's Comet comes across, or else they're in big trouble with the Fire Nation. There's other stories that have played with this sort of aligning of the spheres, and then it will cause this to happen. And so that gives you your ticking clock. And that's one of the nice things about playing with the sun as a artifice or as a focal point is that you have a definite time limit. Either your heroes fighting against the hordes of darkness have to survive until sunup, or if you're following the dark creature, the Sluagh, or the vampire, then they've got to get whatever they're doing done before sunup. And I don't think we've really seen enough, or at least I feel like we haven't seen enough people play around with this trope of like, why don't we have the protagonist where the sunlight is their deadline and they are dead if they don't get back home, get everything done, beat up their antagonist, get the thing, and get back home before bedtime. Stakes are high. So how does it all refer back to your content creation, you might ask? Let's break it down. First, the takeaway. When you're creating a monster, you don't have to just give them a random weakness. Design something that is thematically linked to the story. Are you telling a story about the dangers of venturing out too far? Have a vampire that's trapped out in the woods and has to make their way through very dangerous terrain during the day with minimal cover. Part of the story. Are you trying to explore the theme of the price of victory? Maybe your army of Norse dwarves push themselves too far in order to defeat an ancient enemy. They finally vanquish that enemy, only for the king to watch his entire army turn to stone before his eyes as the enemies flee before him. Now, these are just some examples. Leave a story you're working on in the comments. I'll see if we can't come up with a proper dilemma. Also, good time for me to mention that I am a narrative consultant. I work with business owners and storytellers, content creators to help them, kind of find the essence of the story that they are trying to tell, or even figure out what their story is and how to tell it. Hit me up in the DMs and I'd be happy to see how I can help you. Now, back to the weaknesses. Does your creature or character fear water because it's a creature of fire and rage? Does it fear music because it's a being of pure silent hate? Thematic weakness makes a monster feel more thoughtful and deeply embedded in your world, and it also gives you more opportunity to wrap that weakness into the story that you're telling. Other ways to steal this lore. One, ticking clock, as I've said before. You've got... And there's a couple of different ways you can play with this. It doesn't always have to be a ticking clock specifically. Maybe it is you've got 12 hours before all these barricades will be broken down and zombies or X monster comes pouring in and you're done for. Maybe another option is you've got 3 days to complete this mission and then get back to the checkpoint, or else the chopper, the boat, whatever, leaves without you and then you're just stranded there. Maybe a loved one or, the king or the queen or whoever is poisoned and they will die in 48 hours unless you get the antidote. That's a ticking clock. You got to move really fast. Now, there's been a lot of movies that have played with this idea, and it's been taught a lot in screenwriting. One of the most specific I can think of is a movie called Crank. I believe it was in the early 2000s, where Jason Statham wakes up. He has been poisoned, and he is trying to find the people that did it and basically get revenge before he dies. And it's just finding ways to keep his heart pumping long enough to it's a crazy movie. It's a heck of a trip. There's a couple of moments in that movie that have not aged well. So I have warned you on that. Outside of that, try to enjoy the adrenaline rush that is Crank. So that's takeaway 1. Takeaway 2. The weakness defines the monster. A monster's weakness tells you more about its nature than its strength do. A vulnerability to sunlight immediately defines it as unnatural, a thing of the dark, that cannot exist in the world of light and life. Now, we've seen this used for trolls and dwarves. Sun turns them to stone in certain folklore. This reinforces their connection to the earth, to stone and mountains. They don't just burst into flames, they return to the stone that they came from. For modern vampires, the sun burns them. This reinforces their status as a holy curse, a creature of pure evil being cleansed by pure light of the sun. But your stories don't necessarily have to have a Judeo-Christian background. Perhaps purity means something different in the world that you've created. What creatures run counter to that, and what objects of purity would hurt them as a result? Number 3, light as a catalyst rather than a weapon. The sunlight doesn't have to be a weakness. It can be a source of power. a deadline or a ritual, or maybe even a trigger for a great transformation. Again, referencing back to Dark Crystal, the Great Conjunction of the Three Suns is a neutral event. The suns don't care what's going on. They are just aligning. It is the battle between the Skeksis and the Gelflings that decide whether the Skeksis will achieve immortality and rule the world forever, or the Gelflings will have a chance to heal the world. The sunlight isn't good or evil in this the sunlight isn't good or evil in this instance. It's a source of immense power that both sides are racing to use for their own ends. One is a little more altruistic, true, but having two colliding ideologies, the few over the many or the many over the few, is one that continues to play out in fiction and nonfiction alike. The sunlight isn't good or evil in this instance. It's a source of immense power that both sides are racing to use for their own ends. One is a little more altruistic, true, but having two colliding ideologies, the few over the many or the many over the few, is one that continues to play out in fiction and nonfiction alike. Now we come to the end, the takeaway. There are a number of ways you can play with this trope. What if your heroes are the only ones who are weakened by the sun? What if a magical artifact only works at high noon? You can invert the classic trope that light is good, dark is bad, and you can create some complex and morally ambiguous stories, maybe stories we haven't heard before. What are some other examples that you can think of? Are they unicorns that commit murder and then have a herd of pigs that help them hide the bodies? Fluffy clouds that strangle people? Kittens with switchblades that snap their fingers as they approach? Leave me some examples that you would use, or maybe you have some ideas down in the comments. And we look forward to hearing from you, and see you next time.